it's clear that overwhelming pressure for the US, the Trump administration, and the kind of Arab and Muslim nations of Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey will got this over the line.
So there's an agreement for a ceasefire for now. An agreement to see Hamas release the remaining hostages, for Israel to release hundreds of Palestinian prisoners, and for Israeli troops to begin withdrawing from parts of Gaza. There's also been the green light for hundreds of trucks carrying aid to go into Gaza. Well, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said it was a momentous development and gave his thanks to the US President.
We couldn't have achieved it without the extraordinary help of President Trump and his team, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, and that and the courage of our soldiers who entered Gaza, I think, has brought us to this point. I want to personally thank both of you, Steve, Jared. It's been long hours.
There is clear, obvious jubilation, celebration in Gaza, Jerusalem, Tel Aviv's Hostage Square. But some tricky issues have not yet been finalised. Arieh Kovler has spoken to us many times over the last couple of years on this programme, the writer and political analyst in Israel, who joins us now. Arieh, good morning.
Good morning.
Can we start by explaining exactly what was agreed late last night?
Well, the most important thing was that they agreed to start a ceasefire that came into effect on 1:30 in the morning Israel time, and to begin urgently the IDF withdrawal from those mostly urban areas of Gaza that was agreed in the deal, and also necessary for Hamas to be able to get hold of the hostages, both living and the bodies of hostages too. So that's already done. And then more generally, to agree to the deal to exchange hundreds of Palestinian prisoners, including terrorist murderers, for the hostages that are being held. Now, those agreement is subject to challenge by the Supreme Court in Israel. People can go, if their family members was killed by one of these terrorists, they can go and file an appeal. But it's basically unheard of for the court to accept those appeals. It's a process really kind of symbolic. And it looks like we're going to be seeing the beginning of hostage releases in the next 72 hours.
Yeah, Monday or Tuesday, the US president said. What helped get this deal over the line? Because it's not that dissimilar to one that's been put on the table before.
I mean, that depends who you ask. You know, if you ask the kind of official Israeli position, then the Israelis will say, Netanyahu will say, well, this is the deal we wanted all along. It was only Hamas that was saying no. And what got us over the line was that we were attacking more in Gaza. We were trying to conquer Gaza City, and of course, Donald Trump and the Americans. If you ask the Arab nations, they would say that the issue was actually Israel was not willing to do this deal before, and that it was Donald Trump and the Americans essentially threatening Israel in private rooms in ways that we couldn't hear after this strike on Qatar, to say you've gone too far now. You've done all we're going to let you do in Gaza, and you're going to have to agree to whatever we tell you to at this point. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Certainly, Hamas needed pressure on it in order to agree to any kind of deal. But it's clear that overwhelming pressure for the US, the Trump administration, and the kind of Arab and Muslim nations of Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey will got this over the line.
To what extent is there a sort of sense of jubilation right now?
Jubilation is a very strong word. Look, these deals are hard for Israel because they do involve the release of large numbers of terrorists. And in the next couple of weeks, Israelis will see on their TV the family members of people who were killed by the terrorists being released, talking about what it means that those killers are going free. I think the biggest feeling is a feeling of relief. There was a sense in Israel that there was kind of no way out of this, that we were stuck potentially for years with an ongoing and difficult, painful, bloody war with hostages that seemed to have very little hope of coming home. And this is kind of a light at the end of a tunnel that we thought was going to go on almost forever.
And I think probably that relief doesn't come until those hostages have been released, when that actually happens, when they get to see them and see their families. This is phase one of the plan. What comes next?
Well, this is what we've been here before, particularly in the last deal that was in January, February. That there was also a large-scale hostage release that was phase one, and phase two was supposed to be negotiating for the end of the war. That never really happened. Those negotiations were never reached. At that time, Israeli leaders were kind of saying, particularly to those more right-wing members of the coalition, oh, we're not really going to do that. Yeah, the deal says that we're going to go back to fighting right after, and that is kind of what happened. Each side claimed the others broke the ceasefire. This case, that's not what we're seeing. We're seeing Israeli ministers say they have no intention of going back to fighting. We're seeing briefing from the Trump administration that they are putting immense pressure on Israel. There was a briefing this morning from an administration official that there was an implicit threat of an arms embargo if Israel went back to fighting. Um, so there's a big challenge ahead. Do how does Israel achieve its aims, which are the removal of Hamas as the government of Gaza, its disarming, and kind of keeping it safe in the long term, while Hamas and the Gaza parties want massive reconstruction, and Hamas wants to keep as many of its arms as possible. Those are the big issues on the table now.
Yeah, I mean, for example, who's preparing right now to govern Gaza?
Well, there's also some proposals flying around, whether it is some kind of like international board with the Arab states involved, and perhaps the EU, perhaps Tony Blair. And then you're seeing a lot of noises coming out of the Palestinian side, both Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, that Gaza must remain governed by Palestinians. So I suspect the answer to that will be something in between. A government of Palestinians and then an oversight board or something on top of that of internationals. Yeah, that's obviously one of the key issues moving forward. I think trickier will be the disarmament issue. That and the question of Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. Israel is very uncomfortable about having to leave the border between Egypt and Gaza essentially unguarded and wants to keep a little bit of that land to make sure that it's secure.
On a personal note, Arieh, how optimistic are you about this actually being the end to the war and the start of peace?
Those are two different things. I think this is the end of the war. I don't think we're going to see a return to the large-scale ground operations or large-scale aerial bombardment that has characterized this war or wars in general. I do think we might see a situation more similar to Lebanon. Since the war between Israel and Hezbollah a bit more than a year ago, Israel has continually struck Hezbollah targets in Lebanon almost every day, saying we're just not going to let them rearm, we're not going to let them reorganize, we're not going to let them get back in a situation where they can threaten us. I think we're going to see that continuing to happen as Hamas and other more smaller groups, kind of continue to create threats. I don't think it's going to be an easy negotiation. It might well take years of lack of clarity. But ultimately, someone has to govern Gaza. If Israel doesn't want that to be Hamas, they have to agree to another way forwards.
Donald Trump said he said this was going to be an everlasting peace. He also talked about peace in wider terms of peace in the Middle East. Is that over ambitious at this point?
Well, it depends what you mean. I think that implicit in the background of this process is that some Arab countries that had previously not had formal peace with Israel may move forwards with it. I think we might see, for example, movement from Saudi Arabia to join what Trump calls the Abraham Accords, the peace agreements between Israel and Arab countries that were very pushed by the Trump administration, the first Trump administration. Saudi Arabia has always said that they're open to peace with Israel, but they really want to see it move towards a Palestinian state first. We might see something a bit less than full recognition there. And there might be other Arab states moving forward. So while it does sound like a bit of a pipe dream, I think it does come with some actual genuine kind of mechanical steps, bilateral steps we'll see between Israel and some other Arab and Muslim nations in the coming months and years.
And how much of this do you think was the orchestration of and the impact of the US president?
Look, I am, in my other work, I'm one of the more fierce critics of Donald Trump and the threat he poses to democracy in the United States. That doesn't mean that I can't give him the credit he kind of deserves for this. I don't think we would be seeing anything like a peace deal now if there wasn't a US administration willing to essentially knock over the table and threaten people and scare both Israel and Hamas about what it might do. And sometimes it's that kind of fear and unpredictability that forces other people to make agreements.
Arieh, thank you very much for your time. Arieh Kovler. It's been a pleasure speaking to you today, and as we have done many times over the last couple of years over this devastating conflict.